The first sign that the sky had changed wasn't a sound or a flash of light or a tremor in the ground. It was a string of data on a server in Hawaii, processed while most of the world was asleep. A trajectory that didn't make sense. An object moving too fast to be bound by the sun, entering the solar system at an angle that defied the flat, orderly plane of the planets. By the time the code flagged it, the object was already inside the orbit of Mars. It wasn't the first visitor we'd seen. We remembered Oumuamua in 2017, tumbling like a shard of silent history. We remembered 2I Borisov in 2019, streaming gas like a ghost. But this one, the one the catalogues now call 3I-ATLAS, felt different. It wasn't just passing through. It was arriving with a geometry that ancient astronomers, staring up from ziggurats 5,000 years ago, would have recognized immediately, not as a rock, but as a message. Because to the Sumerians, the sky didn't just contain moving lights, it contained cycles. And the arrival of a foreign star from the deep south of the celestial sphere wasn't an accident of gravity. It was the opening of a door. If you're listening to this tonight, settling into the quiet of a January night in 2026, maybe you've felt that strange, subtle shift in the air recently. The feeling that history is accelerating, that the stable world we thought we lived in is becoming something else. Whether you're in a high-rise in Tokyo watching the city lights, or deep in the American Midwest where the snow absorbs the silence, you are part of the first generation in human history to watch the stars and know with certainty that something is watching back. Take a breath. Let the noise of the day fade. We're going to walk back into the dark, back to the beginning of this cycle, to understand what we're really seeing. The mystery of 3I-ATLAS isn't just about its speed or its origin point near the galactic core. It's about timing. For millions of years, the solar system was a lonely place, a sealed room where planets circled in predictable silence. Then, in less than a decade, the door swung open 3 times. 3 interstellar visitors, 3 anomalies, 3 chances to ask the question we've been afraid to voice. Why now? Mainstream astronomy calls it a statistical cluster, a byproduct of better telescopes and deeper surveys. They say we're just seeing what was always there. And perhaps they're right. Perhaps the universe has always been crowded with wanderers, and we were just too blind to see them. But in the clay archives of ancient Mesopotamia, buried under the dust of Iraq, there is a different explanation. The scribes of Uruk and Nippur wrote of the crossing place, Nibiru. They wrote of the Anunnaki, not as gods who lived in clouds, but as those who came down and returned. And most unsettling of all, they wrote that the return of these cosmic forces wasn't random. It was scheduled. It happened at the end of an age. When the foreign star appeared, the texts say it marked a transition, a moment when the fabric of civilization would be tested, when kingship would be lowered again from heaven, and when humanity would be forced to remember what it had forgotten in the long, sleepy centuries of isolation. The Sumerians didn't fear the sky, but they watched it with a vigilance that bordered on obsession. They knew that when the deep ocean of space sent a ripple toward the shore of our sun, it meant the tide was turning. So as we watch 3I-ATLAS fade into the outbound dark, leaving astronomers with more questions than answers, we have to ask ourselves, are we looking at a rock, or are we looking at the first tick of a clock that hasn't moved in thousands of years? The answer requires us to do something difficult. We have to strip away the modern comfort that says the universe is dead matter and gravity. We have to look at the night sky through the eyes of the first people who mapped it. We have to go back to the warnings they left us, warnings etched in clay, baked in fire, and preserved for a future they knew would eventually arrive. Because the Anunnaki didn't leave us a map of the stars. They left us a calendar, And if the old interpretations are right, the date on that calendar is approaching. The Sumerians didn't have a word for coincidence. In their worldview, if two events happened at the same time, they were connected threads of a single fabric. A river changing course wasn't random hydrology, it was a decision made by the land. A king dying suddenly wasn't biology, it was a decree from the assembly of gods. And a new light in the sky wasn't just a rock passing by, it was a herald. This absence of randomness is difficult for the modern mind to accept. We are trained to see the universe as a machine of disconnected parts, grinding along without intent. But when you stand in the ruins of Eridu, the oldest city in the world, and look up at the same stars that we heard first priests mapped, that modern certainty begins to fray. You start to understand why they were terrified of the anomaly. When Oumuamua arrived in 2017, it broke the rules. It was too long, too red, and it tumbled in a way that suggested it had been violently ejected from its home, or had been drifting for eons. It accelerated as it left the sun, pushed by a force that astronomers couldn't fully explain. No gas tail, no visible jets, just a silent push. Then 2I Borisov appeared, looking remarkably like a comet from our own system, almost deceptively familiar, as if to say, "See? We are just like you." But 3I-ATLAS, it didn't comfort anyone. Discovered by the Atlas survey as a faint smear in the southern sky, it was moving at a speed that screamed Interstellar before the calculations were even finished. But unlike its predecessors, 3I-ATLAS didn't just pass through. It dipped low, skimming the ecliptic plane, the flat disk where Earth and the other planets live before climbing, back out toward the galactic north. This trajectory is hauntingly specific. In the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, the god Marduk establishes the stations of the stars and defines the year. But he also defines the path of Nibiru, the crossing point. It is described not as a fixed orbit like Jupiter or Mars, but as an intersection, a place where the deep meets the shallow. To the ancient astronomer priests, this intersection was the most dangerous place in the sky. It was where the order of the solar system was vulnerable to the chaos of the outer dark, and 3I-ATLAS passed almost exactly through that theoretical zone. The statistical odds of 3 interstellar objects visiting us in such a short span, after millions of years of apparent emptiness, are staggering. It implies that the space between stars isn't empty at all. It's crowded. Or, darker still, it implies that we have entered a region of space that is debris-rich, a cloud of ancient wreckage that the solar system is currently ploughing through. But there is a third possibility, one whispered in the margins of academic papers and shouted in the forums of alternative history. What if these objects aren't random debris? What if they are the bow shock? Imagine a ship moving through calm water. Long before you see the hull, you see the ripples. The pressure wave pushes floating debris ahead of it, disturbing the stillness. If a massive gravitational body, a Planet 9, a brown dwarf, or something stranger, were approaching the heliopause, it would disturb the Oort cloud first. It would send rocks tumbling inward, disorganized scouts announcing the arrival of something heavy. The Sumerians warned of this. They spoke of the terror of the brilliance that precedes the arrival of the Anunnaki. They describe phenomena that sound like atmospheric disturbances, auroras occurring at wrong latitudes, and the shaking of the foundations. We assume these were metaphors for political upheaval. But what if they were literal? What if they were describing the gravitational and magnetic precursor effects of a massive body entering the inner solar system? The arrival of 3I-ATLAS in 2024, followed by its perihelion passage and departure, fits this pattern of disturbance. It behaved like a stone kicked loose by a heavy footfall in the dark, And now, as it fades, the silence it leaves behind feels heavy. Because if 3I-ATLAS was a ripple, what made the wave? To answer that, we have to look at who the Sumerians believed was coming. The Anunnaki weren't just gods in the sense of abstract spirits. They were biological entities with hunger, ambition, and a hierarchy so rigid it suffocated them. They built cities not for worship, but for administration. They dug canals not for beauty, but for survival. They were terrified of their own superiors. And they were terrified of the sky. There is a tablet, damaged and fragmentary, that describes the land of no return. It is often read as a myth of the underworld. But read it with the eyes of an astronomer and it changes. It speaks of a road of dust and a place where stars are swallowed. It speaks of a journey that takes double the life of a king. If the Anunnaki were bound to a cycle, a long elliptical orbit that carries them far from the warmth of the sun, then their return wouldn't just be a homecoming, it would be a rescue mission, a desperate re-entry into the habitable zone, and if that re-entry is approaching, the first thing we would see wouldn't be a planet. It would be the debris field, it would be the dust, it would be the erratic comets dislodged from the frozen dark. We would see exactly what we are seeing now. The question that keeps astronomers awake isn't, what is 3I-ATLAS? We know what it is, a dirty snowball from another star. The question is, why is the door open? Why, after the silence of the Holocene, the 10,000 years of stable climate that allowed humanity to grow from tribes to a global civilization, is the sky suddenly busy? Perhaps the stability we take for granted wasn't a permanent condition. Perhaps it was just the summer of a very long year, and now the leaves are starting to turn. The Anunnaki didn't leave us a message in a bottle. They left us the bottle itself, the very structure of our civilization, our 60-second minute, our 60-minute hour, the 360-degree circle. These aren't arbitrary human inventions. They are the mathematical heartbeat of Sumer, a sexagesimal system designed for one specific purpose: sky mapping. Base 60 mathematics is uniquely suited for calculating celestial cycles. It divides neatly by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20 and 30. It is a system built for astronomers who needed to track the complex interlocking gears of the heavens without the aid of computers. Why would a Neolithic people, barely out of the Stone Age, need such sophisticated orbital math? Unless they were tracking something that required it. The Sumerian king list, a prism of clay inscribed with the names of rulers, splits history into two distinct eras, before the flood and after the flood. The pre-flood kings reigned for impossible spans: 28,800 years, 36,000 years, 43,200 years. Historians dismiss these numbers as pure fantasy, a way to glorify ancient ancestors. But look closer at the numbers. They are all multiples of 3,600, the Sar. In Sumerian cosmology, the Sar was a unit of time, but it was also a unit of the sky. It represented the complete cycle, the perfect circle, and according to the controversial translations of Zecharia Sitchin and others who followed him, it was the orbital period of Nibiru. If we entertain this, even for a moment, as a mathematical possibility rather than a myth, the timeline of human history shifts. Those reign lengths aren't years. They are SARs. They are counts of orbits. And if one orbit takes 3,600 Earth years, then the Anunnaki weren't immortal. They just lived on a slower clock. This difference in time perception is crucial. To a creature that lives for hundreds of thousands of years, human history is a flickering candle. Empires rise and fall in the span of a single afternoon. Our wars are squabbles, our achievements are anthills. But the return? The return is the only deadline that matters. When 3I-ATLAS cut through the plane of the solar system, it was travelling at speeds that suggested a gravity assist from a massive body, perhaps from its home system, or perhaps from something lurking in the outer reaches of ours. It moved like a scout reporting back to the main fleet. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, there is a description of the cedar forest guarded by the monster Humbaba. Gilgamesh and Enkidu travel there to cut down the sacred trees, but before they enter, they see the mountain of the gods, the place where the Anunnaki give judgment. It is a place of terror and awe, shaking with noise. We read this as a terrestrial journey. But what if the cedar forest wasn't a forest of trees? What if it was the star field? What if the monster was a celestial hazard? The Sumerians were masters of dual meaning. A story could be about a king's journey and a star's transit simultaneously. As above, so below wasn't just a mystical slogan, it was a navigational chart. So when we see 3 interstellar objects penetrate the inner solar system in rapid succession, we have to ask, is the forest waking up? The 3 visitors phenomenon has a parallel in the ancient text known as the Mold Apin, the Babylonian compendium of astronomy. It lists stars not just by position, but by path. The path of Enlil, the north, the path of Ea, the south, and the path of Anu, the centre. 3I-ATLAS entered from the south, the path of Ea. Ea or Enki was the Anunnaki scientist, the trickster, the one who saved humanity from the flood when Enlil wanted to wipe us out. He is associated with the Abzu, the deep, watery abyss. In astronomical terms, the southern sky below the ecliptic was often equated with this abyss, the unknown deep. That a messenger has arrived from the path of Enki is symbolic dynamite. If you are a believer in the ancient cycles, this isn't a threat, it's a notification. It suggests that the faction of the Anunnaki that once protected humanity is active again, or perhaps it means the abyss itself is churning. The silence of the Anunnaki since the fall of Babylon has been interpreted as abandonment. The gods have left us, the Lamentations cried, but a 3,600-year orbit puts the last departure roughly around 1600 BCE, the end of the Middle Bronze Age, a time of massive civilizational collapse across the Mediterranean and Near East, the eruption of Thera, the fall of the Hyksos, the vanishing of the Indus Valley civilization. If they left then, the halfway point, the aphelion, the furthest distance from the sun, would have been around 200 AD, the turning of the Roman Empire, the beginning of the long swing back. And now we are on the inbound leg, accelerating. The terror of the brilliance described in the texts might be the physical interaction of a brown dwarf star's magnetosphere with our sun. It would cause solar flares of biblical proportions. It would heat the core of the Earth, triggering volcanoes. It would melt the ice caps in a geological blink. We see climate change today and blame carbon. And we are right. Carbon is a blanket. But is there a heat source under the blanket we aren't accounting for? Is the sun acting strange? Are the other planets warming? Hint, they are. The Anunnaki didn't warn us about carbon. They warned us about the SAR. They warned us that the environment of Earth is not a closed system. It is a passenger in a cosmic vehicle that occasionally drives through fire. 3I-ATLAS is a spark from that fire. As it leaves us, vanishing into the cold, it marks the end of the opening sequence. The curtain has risen. The actors are taking their places. And we, the audience who forgot we bought tickets, are sitting in the dark, wondering why the music has started to swell. The next segment of this mystery lies buried not in the sky, but in our own DNA, because the texts say the Anunnaki didn't just teach us math, they made us, and if the creators are returning, they will be looking for a return on their investment. There is a cylinder seal in the Berlin Museum, catalogue number VA243. It is small, grey stone, rolled onto clay to create a scene of 2 figures presenting a worshipper to a seated god. Between the heads of the figures there is a star, and around the star dots, planets. If you count them, there are 11. But if you include the central star as the sun and the moon as a body, the count is 12. The Sumerians counted the sun and moon as planets, wandering bodies. So Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, that's 11. Who is the 12th? The 12th planet theory, popularised by Zecharia Sitchin, hinges on this seal. He argued that the Sumerians knew of all the planets in our solar system, including Uranus, Neptune and Pluto, millennia before telescopes discovered them. And they knew of one more, Nibiru. Mainstream Assyriologists dismiss VA 243. They say the sun symbol is actually a star, and the planets are just a generic constellation. They point out that Sumerian texts don't explicitly list orbital mechanics for Neptune, but the anomaly remains. Why does the Sumerian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, describe the formation of the solar system with such uncanny accuracy? It describes a watery planet, Tiamat, located between Mars and Jupiter. It describes a rogue intruder, Nibiru Marduk, entering the system from the outer dark. The intruder smashes Tiamat. One half is shattered to become the hammered bracelet, the asteroid belt. The other half is knocked into a new orbit to become Earth. It sounds like a myth. But to a planetary geologist, it sounds like the giant impact hypothesis. It sounds like the origin of the moon. It sounds like the reason Earth has so much water and plate tectonics, while Mars is a dead rock. The Sumerians didn't have geologists, they had priests. So how did they know that the Earth is a scarred survivor of a cosmic collision, unless someone told them? This brings us to the most uncomfortable part of the Anunnaki narrative, the idea that we are not alone in this story, that we are, in fact, the product of it. The texts say, the Anunnaki came to Earth for gold, not for jewellery, but to repair their atmosphere. This sounds bizarre until you look at modern climate engineering. We talk about spraying gold nanoparticles or sulfur into the stratosphere to reflect sunlight and cool the Earth. If Nibiru has a decaying atmosphere and a wildly elliptical orbit that takes it into the freezing deep atmospheric retention, would be their primary survival concern. Gold is the perfect reflector, chemically inert, indestructible. So they came here, they mined, they tired of the labour. The lower tier gods, the Agigi, rebelled. They burned their tools. They surrounded the house of Enlil and demanded relief. The solution? A Lulu, a primitive worker. Enki and the birth goddess Ninhursag took the clay of the Abzu, likely a metaphor for biological material, and mixed it with the essence of the Anunnaki. They created a hybrid, us. We are the gold miners. We are the relief force. This explains the deep traumatic flaw in the human psyche, the feeling that we are made for something higher, yet bound to the mud, the sense of servitude to invisible masters. The God-shaped hole in our hearts isn't spiritual, it's hierarchical. We are waiting for the shift boss to return, and if 3I-ATLAS is the bell signalling the end of the shift, what happens to the workers? The genetic evidence for human intervention is, unsurprisingly, non-existent in mainstream science. Evolution is a slow, blind river, but there are leaps. The sudden expansion of the human brain 200,000 years ago, the sudden emergence of language, the sudden appearance of civilization in Sumer, fully formed with no gradual ramp-up. Kingship was lowered from heaven. Boom. Cities, law, writing, astronomy. Overnight, it feels artificial. It feels like a terraforming project that reached the deployment phase. If the Anunnaki are returning, they aren't coming to invade. You don't invade your own farm. You come to check the harvest. You come to repair the fences. You come to cull the herd if it has become diseased or unruly. And looking at the state of the earth right now, the wars, the pollution, the noise that Enlil complained about in the flood myths, we might be in trouble. 3I-ATLAS might be a sensor, a probe, checking the atmospheric composition, checking the radio chatter, checking the nuclear signatures. When Oumuamua tumbled past, it was silent. When Borisov passed, it was quiet. But 3I-ATLAS, it fragmented. It broke apart near perihelion. Astronomers say it disintegrated due to thermal stress. Or did it deploy? A fragmented object spreads a net. It covers more area. It releases whatever was inside. If 3I-ATLAS was a seed ship or a sensor swarm, its destruction wasn't an accident. It was the mission. The Sumerian texts speak of the me, destinies or divine templates that could be carried, stolen or deployed. Enki was the keeper of the me. Were they physical objects? Data crystals? Nanotech? If 3I-ATLAS released a payload of me into the inner solar system, the effects wouldn't be visible in telescopes. They would be visible in us, in our dreams, in our sudden leaps of technology, in the download of ideas that seems to happen to multiple people at once. The return of the Anunnaki might not be a fleet of ships darkening the sky. It might be a frequency, a signal that activates the dormant coding in the clay they mixed. 200,000 years ago, we might be waking up, and that is a terrifying process. The night is deep now, the stars are wheeling overhead, indifferent to our theories. But somewhere in that darkness, along the southern trajectory of the path of Ea, something has touched the wire. The signal is travelling down the line. And here on Earth, in the quiet hum of our cities and the silence of our deserts, we are starting to hear the hum. The next question is the hardest one. If they are coming back, what do they want with us now? Are we still useful workers, or have we become the noise that needs to be silenced again? The flood was the first reset. It wasn't the last. The silence of the universe is a relatively new idea. For most of human history, the sky was loud. The Sumerians didn't just see the planets, they heard them. They called it the celestial harmony, a vibration that governed life on Earth. But they also heard the discord. When Enlil decided to destroy humanity with the flood, his reasoning wasn't moral. He didn't say we were evil. He said we were loud. The noise of mankind has become too intense for me, he complains in the Atrahasis epic. With their uproar, I am deprived of sleep. We interpret noise as metaphorical. The chaos of overpopulation, the violence of civilization. But what if it was literal? What if the Anunnaki, beings of a different resonance, found the specific electromagnetic or psychic frequency of humanity physically painful? If they operate on a slower, cooler cycle, a 3,600-year wavelength, our frenetic, short-lived buzzing might be like living inside a beehive. Now look at the world today. We have wrapped the Earth in a skin of radio waves, microwaves, cellular signals, and satellite chatter. We are broadcasting our noise louder than at any point in history. If 3I-ATLAS was a listener, it heard a scream. This brings us to the harvest theory. In agricultural terms, you don't interact with the crop while it's growing. You leave it alone. You let the rain and the sun do the work. You only come back when it's time to reap. If the 3,600-year cycle is real, let's look at the intervals. 3,600 years ago, 1600 BCE, the collapse of the Bronze Age, the Exodus, the eruption of Thera, the end of the old Babylonian Empire, a time of massive restructuring, 7,200 years ago, 5,200 BCE, the sudden emergence of Ubaid culture in Mesopotamia, the precursor to Sumer, the drying of the Sahara, the Black Sea deluge, 10,800 years ago, 18,800 BCE, the end of the Younger Dryas, the sudden warming, the invention of agriculture, the building of Göbekli Tepe, a massive stone complex deliberately buried by its creators, Why bury a temple unless you are trying to hide it from the sky, or preserve it for the next return? Every interval aligns with a fundamental reboot of human operating systems. If we are approaching the next interval, the signs shouldn't be political. They should be structural. We should see the breakdown of old systems and the frantic, inexplicable urge to build new ones. We should see a quickening. And we do. AI, quantum computing, space travel. In the last 100 years, a blink of an eye, we have gone from horse carts to Mars rovers. Why the rush? Maybe we aren't driving the bus. Maybe we are being prepped. The Anunnaki factions, Enlil and Enki, had different views on humanity. Enlil saw us as tools, disposable. Enki saw us as children, or at least as a pet project worth saving. The noise Enlil hated might be the very spark Enki engineered. Our creativity, our unpredictability, our soul. The return of Nibiru brings these factions back into proximity. The wars in heaven, described in Revelation, the Mahabharata, and the Enuma Elish, might be the resumption of this family feud. And Earth is the proxy battlefield. 3I-ATLAS, coming from the path of Ea, Enki, might be the first move by the pro-human faction, a signal to wake up the network, to arm the Lulus with knowledge before the Enlil faction arrives to wipe the slate clean. This sounds like science fiction, but look at the sudden disclosure of UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena, by the US government. For 70 years, it was swamp gas. Now it's objects we can't explain. Why the change in narrative? Why now? Because you can't hide the landlord when he's pulling into the driveway. If the watchers are returning, the governments of the world know. They have the deep space telemetry. They saw 3I-ATLAS long before we did. The rush to build Space Force, the rush to return to the moon, the rush to Mars. It's not about exploration. It's about defense or escape. The Sumerians wrote that when the Anunnaki return, the mountains will smoke and the earth will shake. Tectonic activity. We see it rising. The sun will be darkened, solar dimming or eclipses. We see the sun acting erratically. But the most profound change will be internal. Many people report a feeling of waiting, a sense that the career, the mortgage, the daily grind is becoming thin, like a stage set, a feeling that something else is supposed to happen. This is the species memory activating. We remember the last time. We remember the flood. We remember the fire. We remember the ships. The Anunnaki didn't just give us genes, they gave us trauma, and trauma echoes. As 3I-ATLAS departs, it pulls that trauma to the surface. It forces us to look at the sky with the old fear, but also with the old hope. Because if the gods are returning, it means we are not orphans. We are not an accident of chemistry on a lonely rock. We are part of a story that is about to turn the page. The night is quiet, but it is a pregnant quiet, the kind of silence that comes before a thunderclap. We have spoken of the physical signs, the comets, the orbits, the artifacts, but the Sumerians also spoke of the spiritual impact of the return. They called it the shining of the countenance. The presence of the Anunnaki carries a radiation, a glory, a melam that overwhelms the human senses. Are we ready for that? Are we ready to meet the parents? Or are we like teenagers who threw a party while the parents were away, trashed the house, and are now frantically trying to clean up before the car door slams? The cleaning up has begun, but it might be too late. The next segment takes us into the dark forest theory of the cosmos. Why is the universe silent? Maybe because everyone else knows to stay quiet when the giants are walking. And we, with our radio broadcasts and our Voyager probes, have been shouting into the dark. We rang the doorbell. The dark forest theory, proposed by sci-fi author Liu Cixin, suggests that the universe is silent because it is a forest full of armed hunters. If you shout, you get shot. Any civilization that reveals its location is instantly destroyed by a more advanced predator. It's a terrifying solution to the Fermi paradox. But the Sumerian texts suggest a different kind of forest. In 3I-ATLAS, their view, the universe isn't full of strangers. It's full of owners. We aren't hiding in a dark forest. We are living in a servant's quarters on a vast estate while the masters are away on business. The silence isn't predation, it's vacancy. And the danger isn't that a stranger will hear us. The danger is that the landlord is coming back to find we've thrown a rager in the main hall. Consider the Voyager probes. Voyager 1 and 2 are currently rushing out of the solar system, carrying the golden record, a gold-plated copper disc containing sounds, images, and maps of Earth. We sent diagrams of our DNA. We sent the pulsar coordinates of our sun. To a scientist, this is a gesture of hope. To a Sumerian strategist, it is a suicide note. If the Anunnaki factions are real, and if the Enlil faction, the one that viewed humanity as noisy, troublesome labour, is dominant, then Voyager is not a greeting. It is a confession. It says, we are here, we have technology, we have multiplied, and we are loud. The golden record includes a recording of a kiss, a mother's voice, the sound of wind. It's innocent, but it also includes the blast of a rocket, the sound of our ambition. When 3I-ATLAS passed through, did it intercept that signal? Did it confirm that the Lulu has learned how to leave the cradle? In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the gods are terrified when the flood begins. They cower like dogs against the wall of heaven. This is a crucial detail. It implies that the Anunnaki are not omnipotent. They rely on technology. They fear the forces of nature. They are biological, fallible, and fearful. This makes them more dangerous. A God who is secure in his power can be merciful. A God who is afraid of losing control is a tyrant. If they return to find us splitting the atom, the very building block of the universe they engineered, how do they react? We have reached the Promethean threshold. We have stolen the fire. Historically, the punishment for that is having your liver eaten by an eagle forever. But there is another layer to the return, one that goes beyond ships and politics, the Melem. Sumerian kings wrote extensively about the Melem, a terrifying, awe-inspiring radiance that surrounded the gods. When a human encountered it, they were physically overwhelmed. It induced trembling, blindness, and a crushing sense of insignificance. Modern neurologists might call this a manipulation of the human electromagnetic field. If the Anunnaki possess technology that interfaces directly with consciousness, their arrival wouldn't just be seen, it would be felt. Imagine a global frequency shift, a sudden, unexplained pressure in the temporal lobe of 8 billion people, a collective anxiety or a collective euphoria that defies explanation. We talk about the technological singularity, the moment AI surpasses human intelligence, but we might be approaching the biological singularity, the moment the creators return to interface with the creation. The junk DNA in our genome, the 98% of our code that seemingly does nothing, might not be junk at all. It might be the receiver. It might be the code that activates only when the Melem is present. If 3I-ATLAS was the wake-up call, the handshake protocol has already begun. The erratic weather, the societal polarization, the breakdown of old narratives. These might be the symptoms of a species undergoing a forced software update. We are looking for ships in the sky. We should be looking at the glitches in our own reality. The Anunnaki story is not a closed book. It is a serialized drama, and we have been living in the intermission for 3,000 years. The lights are flickering in the lobby. The ushers are opening the doors. The question isn't, are they real? The evidence, from the stones of Baalbek to the math of the Babylonians, is carved into the bedrock of our history. The question is, when they look at us now, at our wars, our plastic oceans, our digital screams, and our boundless, heartbreaking capacity for love, do they see a failed experiment ready for the incinerator? Or do they see a child that has finally grown up enough to meet its parents eye to eye? The orbit is closing. The SAR is complete. The silence is over. The solar system is not flat. If you look at the orbits of the 8 known planets, they all lie roughly on the same plane, like records spinning on a turntable. This is the ecliptic. It makes sense. They all formed from the same spinning disk of dust and gas. But there is a problem. The sun is tilted. Or rather, the entire disk of planets is tilted about 6 degrees off from the sun's equator. For decades, astronomers have treated this like a cosmic rounding error, a quirk of formation. But in 2016, researchers at Caltech noticed something else. The objects in the Kuiper belt, the ring of frozen debris beyond Pluto, are clustering. They aren't scattered randomly. They are swinging out to one side, as if a massive invisible hand is herding them. The math suggests that for this clustering to happen, there must be a perturber deep in the outer darkness, a planet 5 to 10 times the mass of Earth, a super-Earth or mini-Neptune, on a highly elliptical orbit that takes thousands of years to complete. They call it Planet 9. To a scientist, Planet 9 is a mathematical necessity to balance the equation. To a student of Sumerian cosmology, it is something else entirely. It is the validation of a map drawn on clay 5,000 years ago. The Sumerian description of Nibiru was never just another planet. It was described as the planet of the crossing. Its symbol was the cross. Its defining characteristic was that it crossed the plane of the other planets, disrupting them. The proposed orbit of Planet 9 is highly inclined. It doesn't sit on the record player. It dives through it. And because of its mass, it would theoretically warp the orbital plane of the entire solar system over billions of years. It would explain the 6-degree tilt. We are looking for a ghost that we can feel pulling on the floorboards, even if we can't see it. But here is where the Anunnaki warning shifts from astronomy to something more unsettling. If Planet 9 is real, and if it is indeed the Nibiru of legend, it is currently near its aphelion, its furthest point from the sun. That is why we can't see it. It is lost in the star field, cold and dark. But 3I-ATLAS didn't come from the aphelion. It came from the general direction of the proposed perihelion approach. Think of it like a scout. If a massive vessel or a massive planet is moving through the Oort cloud, it disturbs the debris field. It pushes rocks ahead of it. It sends a bow wave of comets and asteroids tumbling into the inner solar system. The sudden uptick in interstellar objects, Oumuamua, Borisov, 3I-ATLAS, might not be random visitors. They might be the gravel snapping under the tyres of an approaching truck. In the Enuma Elish, the approach of Nibiru or Marduk is preceded by his weapons, winds, storms, and smaller bodies that clear the path. He sends the 4 winds ahead of him to disturb the belly of Tiamat. If we interpret Tiamat not as a monster, but as the stable order of the inner solar system, then the winds are gravitational disturbances. We are seeing comets that disintegrate for no reason. We are seeing asteroids that tumble rather than spin. We are seeing the sun enter a grand solar minimum while simultaneously producing X-class flares that defy the cycle. The system is rattling. The Anunnaki texts speak of the Shuru, the weapon of terror. But they also speak of the Shim, the vehicle. The distinction is often blurred. Is the planet the vehicle? Or is the planet simply the carrier? Some modern theorists suggest that Nibiru isn't a planet in the biological sense. It's a Dyson swarm, a colonised rock, a battle station. If an advanced civilization wanted to survive for millions of years, they wouldn't stay on a planet that hugs a star. Stars are dangerous. They flare. They eventually die. A rogue planet that orbits in the deep cold, using geothermal or artificial energy, is a much safer long-term bunker. It is invisible. It is mobile. And if it needs resources, it just needs to dip into a Goldilocks zone every few thousand years to refuel on water, on heavy metals, on biological diversity. This reframing changes the Anunnaki from gods to harvesters. It changes the return from a judgment to a pit stop. And what happens to the ants when the picnic blanket is laid down? They aren't destroyed out of malice. They are just in the way. The warning of 3I-ATLAS might be a specific type of telemetry. If it shattered, as reports indicate, it released material. Was it a probe designed to test our atmospheric density, our viral load, our nuclear readiness? In 2019, the US Navy confirmed that UFOs, are real, and that they are interested in our nuclear capabilities. They hover over silos. They shut down warheads. We interpret this as they are saving us from ourselves, the benevolent space brothers preventing nuclear war. But look at it through the eyes of the harvester. If you are coming back to your farm and you see the livestock playing with matches in the barn, you don't take the matches away because you love the livestock. You take them away because you don't want the barn to burn down. You protect the asset. Earth is the asset. We are just the tenants. As we stare into the dark sector of the sky where Planet 9 is theoretically hiding, we have to ask, why haven't we found it yet? We have infrared telescopes. We have the web. We can see galaxies 13 billion light years away. How can we miss a planet in our own backyard, unless it doesn't want to be seen? The Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki as masters of illusory appearances. They could cloak themselves. They could wear the sky like a garment. If the object approaching us is not just a rock, but a construct, active camouflage is not magic. It is engineering. And the silence of the dark forest deepens. The next piece of the puzzle lies in the South Pole, in the path of air. Why are all the major powers of Earth, the US, China, Russia, suddenly obsessed with Antarctica? Why are we building massive neutrino detectors in the ice? Why are high-level dignitaries visiting a frozen wasteland? Maybe they aren't looking down at the ice. Maybe they are looking up from the bottom of the world, watching the southern approach, waiting for the heavy footfall that they know is coming. The oldest skywatchers did not imagine the heavens as an empty backdrop. They treated it as a landscape with districts, borders and gates. And one of those borders, in the Mesopotamian tradition, was not a mountain range or a river, but a direction, the south. In modern astronomy, south is only a coordinate. It carries no meaning beyond geometry. But in older cosmologies, directions behaved like characters in a story. North could be steady, east could be announcing, west could be swallowing. And south, often, was the deep place, the region of the sky that felt less owned, less understood, more capable of producing surprises. That is a strange thing to say about a direction. And yet, it is exactly the kind of strangeness that survives in myth, because it once served a purpose. The question is what that purpose was. Was it simply that the southern sky looked different to people living in the north? Or did it carry a memory, subtle, half erased, of something that once arrived from that quarter? There is a simple, honest explanation that does not require any hidden planet at all. If you live at the latitude of ancient Sumer, the southern sky sits low. It is harder to read. It shimmers closer to the horizon, and its stars are more easily swallowed by dust and moisture. When the air turns thick, the south becomes the first place where the sky seems to close. In that sense, the South really would have felt like an abyss. But then a quieter problem appears. Why did the Mesopotamian tradition develop such a precise language for dividing the sky into paths at all? Why insist that stars belong to corridors, with names that sound less like science and more like administration? Why organise the heavens as if it were a kingdom, complete with jurisdictions, unless the sky had consequences that were practical, not merely poetic? In the modern Planet 9 hypothesis, the focus is not myth, but mathematics. Astronomers notice that several distant Kuiper belt objects appear clustered in a way that suggests gravitational shepherding by an unseen massive planet far beyond Neptune. That hypothesis remains unconfirmed, but it has had enough weight to shape real observing campaigns and real debates, because the pattern, if it holds up, needs an explanation, and if a large distant planet exists, it would not necessarily move in the neat plane of the other planets. It might be tilted. It might travel on an orbit that feels almost rude, slicing across the solar system's old habits instead of joining them. Now the mind does what minds always do at night. It places the ancient word crossing beside the modern word inclination, and it notices how naturally they sit together. It hears in the old idea of Nibiru as a crosser an uncanny rhyme with the modern picture of a perturber that does not behave like the rest, and it wonders carefully whether this is coincidence, or whether myths sometimes preserve the shape of a truth long after they lose its measurements. But even if that rhyme is real, it doesn't tell us what matters most. If there is an unseen planet, where is it now? And why does the search for it keep feeling, to the public imagination, like looking for a presence that does not wish to be found? In the alternative, interpretations that tie Nibiru to the Anunnaki, the return is not supposed to be obvious at first. It is supposed to be preceded by lesser disturbances. Not a trumpet blast, but a shift in the small things, a strange visitor, an odd trajectory, a subtle thickening of coincidences. And that is where interstellar objects have become such powerful psychological triggers in the modern era, even when mainstream astronomy treats them as natural, rare but expected in a galaxy full of debris. The human brain does not experience them as ordinary. It experiences them as a knock at the door. The knock does not have to be loud to be effective. A quiet knock is worse because it leaves room for interpretation. It allows the mind to ask, was that the wind, or was that deliberate? And once the mind asks that question, it begins to review everything it thought it knew about the house. Still, accuracy matters here because trust is the spine of a long documentary, mainstream. Science does not interpret interstellar visitors as scouts, and it does not treat Planet 9 as a returning world from ancient texts. Planet 9, if it exists, is a hypothesis built from observed orbital patterns and simulations. And interstellar objects, in mainstream terms, are simply bodies ejected from other systems that occasionally pass through ours by chance. Yet the slow burn tension comes from the overlap between two truthful statements that don't sit comfortably together. 1. The solar system is not sealed, it is permeable, and outsiders can pass through. 2. The oldest civilizations on Earth did not behave as if the sky were irrelevant. They behaved as if it carried schedules, warnings, and returns. If those two statements are both true, then a third question arrives on its own, uninvited. What kind of event would convince a culture to build its calendar with a long memory? Because the Sumerians were not merely romantic about the heavens, they were administrative about them. They watched, they recorded, they repeated, they maintained lists across generations. That is what people do when the sky is not just beautiful, but consequential. And if something consequential happens on a timescale longer than a human life, longer than a dynasty, then myth becomes the only container large enough to hold it. A chart can be lost, a tablet can be broken, a library can burn, but a story told to children can survive a collapse because it migrates into the mouth, not the archive. It becomes a habit. It becomes a superstition. It becomes a warning that no one can fully explain anymore. This is one of the reasons the flood motif matters, even for listeners who do not treat it as literal history. Flood stories appear in many cultures, and in Mesopotamia they are among the oldest written narratives we have. In the 3I-ATLAS tradition, the gods complain about human noise, and the flood is framed as a solution to an unbearable disturbance. Whether that noise is metaphor, theology, or social commentary, the structure of the story is consistent. Humanity grows. The overseers become displeased. A reset is attempted. A remnant survives. And that structure has a cold, practical feel to it. It resembles how managers talk about systems, not how poets talk about tragedy, which raises a question that is not dramatic, only quietly unsettling. What kind of historical experience produces a theology that sounds like bureaucracy? Now the South returns to the centre of the room. In many northern cultures, the North becomes the anchor. But in Mesopotamian sky division, the deep often lives below the main track of the sun. The South becomes the region you can't quite domesticate, the region that does not belong fully to your calendar, the region where unfamiliar stars rise briefly, skim the horizon, and vanish again. And perhaps that is why, in alternative readings, the path associated with E linked with the deep waters, with the Abzu, with the hidden place, feels symbolically married to the South, not because an ancient scribe had a telescope, but because the human mind attaches meaning to whatever is hardest to control. But even symbolism has constraints. If a distant planet were approaching the inner system on an inclined orbit, it could appear from directions that do not match our intuitive map of up and down. The ecliptic is a human convenience. Space does not care about it. A tilted orbit could carry an object through sky regions that older traditions marked as uncanny. And if that happened repeatedly across millennia, the direction itself could become a warning sign in memory. That idea is still speculative. It must be held that way, yet it remains useful, not as proof, but as a framework for why the South keeps returning in this kind of story, why it becomes the stage entrance, why, when people speak of a return, they often point to the portion of the heavens that feels least owned. There is another reason the South matters, and it has nothing to do with myth. It is one of the best places on earth to look at the sky, not because it is mystical, but because it is quiet. The air can be stable, the nights can be long, the horizon opens in a way that city dwellers forget is possible. When people build instruments to listen to the faintest whispers of the universe, they often choose places that are extreme, because extremes reduce interference. So the South, in the modern world, becomes a kind of listening post, a place where human noise is lower and cosmic noise is clearer. And that creates a gentle, eerie symmetry. The oldest tradition frames the South as the deep place from which disturbances come. The modern tradition treats the South as the deep place from which signals can be caught. Different meanings, different methods, yet the same direction keeps becoming the focus of attention. A listener might ask in the dim hours when the mind is both relaxed and sharp, is that symmetry meaningless? Or is it exactly how the world behaves? Full of patterns that only exist because human beings keep returning to the same practical solutions, and later mistake them for omens. And then another quieter question arrives behind it. If a civilization truly expected a return on a long cycle, thousands of years, how would it prepare? It could not build a bunker and guard it for 3,600 years. It could not maintain a warning siren across the collapse of languages. It would need something stranger and simpler. It would need the warning to be woven into what people do without thinking, into the way they divide the sky, into the way they name directions, into the way they feel a brief unease when a star rises at the wrong time of year, into the way they tell a story about crossing, even when they cannot say what is crossing or when. That is what makes these ancient systems so potent for nighttime listening. They refuse to behave like dead artifacts. They behave like software that keeps running in the background, long after the original device is gone. So the tension does not need a spaceship. It does not need a secret agency. It does not need anything more than the possibility that the sky has patterns we have not finished understanding, because if Planet 9 exists, it has not been confirmed. And if Nibiru is only a myth, then it will remain a myth. But if a massive perturber exists, and we eventually find it, if its orbit turns out to be long, tilted and strange, then the human mind will immediately perform the oldest trick it knows. It will go back to the tablets and ask whether anyone, somehow, remembered the outline. Not the data, not the proof, just the outline. And if the outline matches closely enough, even by accident, the story will tighten. The listener will feel the room become smaller, as if the walls of history have inched inward. And the taker high. Next question will be unavoidable. If the ancients encoded a return, did they also encode what happens before the return, what the sky does in the years when the long orbit starts to swing inward again? Because if there is an approach, it would not announce itself with certainty. It would begin with ambiguity, with subtle shifts that can be explained away until there are too many of them to ignore. And somewhere in that ambiguity, in that early phase where nothing is provable yet, a third visitor like 3I-ATLAS becomes less like a fact and more like a feeling, a small dark speck crossing our system, leaving behind not answers, but a renewed sensitivity to timing, a renewed suspicion that the solar system has a rhythm larger than a human lifespan. In the next segment, the focus narrows again, away from the south as a direction and toward a single ancient habit that is easy to overlook. The habit of writing a warning in 2 layers at once, 1 layer for the public and 1 layer for whoever might someday recognize the code. And if that habit is real, then one specific question has been waiting patiently for thousands of years. When the crossing comes, what do the texts say you are supposed to notice first? The idea of a coded text is not new, but usually we think of codes as secrets meant to be hidden. A spy encrypts a message so the enemy can't read it. A cult hides its rituals so outsiders can't see them. But there is another kind of code, a time capsule code. If you need to send a message across thousands of years, across the rise and fall of languages, the drift of continents, the forgetting of gods, you don't encrypt it. You do the opposite. You make it so simple, so fundamental, that people will repeat it without understanding why. You hide the message in plain sight. You hide it in a nursery rhyme, in a religious ritual, in the shape of a building, in the number of minutes in an hour. The sexagesimal system of Sumer, base 60, is still the way we measure time and angles. Why? Because it works. But why does it work? Because it maps the sky. If the Anunnaki wanted to leave a beacon that would survive their absence, they wouldn't build a monument that could be eroded by sand. They would build a monument out of mathematics. They would teach the Lulus to count in a way that forces them to track the cycles of the heavens, even if they forget the names of the gods who taught them. Every time you look at a watch, you are using Sumerian math. Every time you navigate by GPS, you are using the 360-degree circle. We are still running their software. But what if there is a trigger in the code, a specific date or a specific alignment that unlocks the next layer of instruction? This brings us to the prophecies of the end times. Every major religion has them. The apocalypse, Ragnarok, the Day of Judgment, the return of the Mahdi, the Maitreya. We treat these as separate myths, but if you strip away the cultural paint, the underlying structure is identical. A long period of silence and decay, a sudden acceleration of events, wars, rumours of wars, earthquakes, celestial signs, sun darkening, stars falling, the arrival of a king or judge from the sky, a new golden age, but only after a massive purification. It reads like a schedule, and the schedule seems to be tied to the precession of the equinoxes, the slow 25-9-20-year wobble of the Earth's axis. This great year is divided into 12 ages of 2,160 years. The age of Taurus, the age of Aries, the age of Pisces. We are currently transitioning from Pisces to Aquarius. The dawning of the age of Aquarius is often celebrated as a time of spiritual awakening, but in Sumerian terms, Enki is the water bearer. Aquarius is his sign. If the cycle of Nibiru, 3,600 years, and the cycle of the zodiac, 2,160 years, are meshing gears, there are moments when they click together, moments of grand alignment. Are we in one of those moments? The return of the Enki faction, the scientists, the geneticists, the teachers, would align with the themes of Aquarius: information, technology, sudden leaps in knowledge, the breaking of old structures. But the transition is never smooth. The birth pangs of a new age are described in horrific detail in the texts, and this is where the warnings become specific. The Hopi Indians of North America speak of the blue star Kachina. They say that when the blue star makes its appearance in the heavens, the fifth world will begin. The fourth world, ours, will end. It will come when the Sakwasohu, blue star Kachina, dances in the plaza and removes his mask. Is 3I-ATLAS the blue star, or was it a precursor? Comets often burn blue or green due to their chemical composition. Atlas had a distinct cyan hue before it disintegrated. The removing of the mask is an evocative phrase. It suggests a revelation, a disclosure. If 3I-ATLAS broke apart, did it remove its mask? Did it reveal what was inside? The timing is the key. The Hopi prophecies say this event precedes a great purification. The world will rock to and fro. Sumerian texts say Nibiru causes the earth to wobble. If a massive magnetic body passes close to Earth, it would tug on our magnetic field. It would cause the poles to wander. It would disrupt the rotation. We know the magnetic North Pole is racing towards Siberia at an unprecedented speed. We know the Schumann resonance, the heartbeat of the Earth, is spiking. We know the rotation of the Earth has sped up, shortening our days by milliseconds. Are these the wobbles? The skepticism is necessary. Earth is a dynamic planet. It has wobbled before. The poles have flipped before. To blame it all on a hidden planet is a leap. But the convergence of these physical symptoms with the mythological timeline is the anomaly. It is the too many coincidences problem. If you are a detective and you find a body, a weapon, a motive, and a suspect, all in the same room, you don't call it a coincidence. You call it a case. The case for the Anunnaki return is built on circumstantial evidence, but there is a mountain of it, and the witnesses are starting to talk. In 2020, Haim Eshed, the former head of Israel's space security program, gave an interview that shocked the world. He claimed that a galactic federation exists, that the US and Israel have been in contact with them for years, that there is an underground base on Mars where human and alien representatives meet. He said humanity wasn't ready to know, that we would go crazy. Was he a senile old man, or was he a man who decided, at the end of his life, to leak the truth? His description of a federation aligns perfectly with the Sumerian assembly of the gods. The Anunnaki were not a monolith. They had a council. They voted. They had disputes. If Eshed is telling the truth, then the return isn't something that will happen. It is something that is already happening. The diplomatic channels are open. The negotiations are taking place. And 3I-ATLAS? Maybe it wasn't a scout for the invaders. Maybe it was a courier for the diplomats. The interstellar object might be the cosmic equivalent of a diplomatic pouch. This reframes the entire phenomenon. We aren't looking at an invasion. We are looking at a reintegration. Earth has been a rogue state. North Korea, isolated, cut off from the main trade routes, allowed to develop its own strange culture in the dark. But now the sanctions are being lifted, the borders are opening, and with that opening comes the shock of realizing how small and backward we really are. The cargo cult of humanity, building airstrips out of bamboo, hoping the gods will land, is about to meet the actual cargo planes, and the realization will be humiliating. We think we are the apex of creation. We think our smartphones are magic. We think our nuclear weapons make us powerful. To a civilization that can engineer a planet's orbit, we are children playing with matches in a sandbox. The warning of the Anunnaki is not just about physical destruction. It is about psychological demolition, the destruction of our ego. Are we ready to be small again? The silence of the night is a comfort because it feels empty. We are the masters of the house when the lights are out. But if the lights turn on and we see who is standing in the corner, the next segment moves from the sky to the ground, to the physical evidence that has been staring us in the face, the impossible stones, the architecture that defies gravity. And why the sudden rush to excavate them now? Why are we digging up the past just as the future is arriving? There is a stone in Baalbek, Lebanon, that weighs 1:650 tons. It is called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. It is cut with laser-like precision. It is lying in a quarry, waiting to be moved. Modern cranes, the biggest, most powerful machines we have, struggle to lift 1,000 tons. And yet, beneath the Roman temple of Jupiter at Baalbek, there are 3 stones, the trilithon, each weighing 800 tons, lifted 20 feet into the air and placed so perfectly that you cannot fit a razor blade between them. The Romans didn't do this. They built on top of it. They treated the platform as a foundational ruin, a legacy from an older, mightier time. Who moves 800-ton stones, and why? If you want to build a temple, you use bricks. You use small blocks. You don't carve a single block the size of an apartment building unless you need that mass. Mass dampens vibration. Massive stones are stable. They don't resonate. Was Baalbek a temple? Or was it a launch pad? Zechariah Sitchin proposed that Baalbek was the landing place, the spaceport of the Anunnaki. The massive stones were the only thing that could withstand the thrust of a descending chemical rocket. The platform had to remain stable while a mountain of fire descended upon it. This sounds absurd until you look at the launch pads at Cape Canaveral. They are massive, reinforced concrete structures designed to channel fire and vibration. If the Anunnaki used chemical rockets, which the texts suggest, chariots of fire, noise like a storm, they needed infrastructure. And now look at where the wars are: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, the very heart of the ancient Sumerian and Canaanite lands. We are told these are wars for oil, for democracy, for religion. But is it possible that underneath the surface there is a race to secure the hardware? In 2003, the first thing the US troops did when they entered Baghdad was secure the National Museum. Why? Why was the museum a strategic priority during an invasion? Rumours have circulated for years that Saddam Hussein was excavating something in the desert, that he had found technology, that he believed himself to be the reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar, tasked with rebuilding Babylon and opening the gate of the gods. If he found a stargate, a device, a text, a weapon. That would explain the urgency. The looting of the Baghdad Museum was selective. Not everything was taken. Specific tablets were targeted. Specific artifacts went missing. Who has them now? We return to the idea of the cargo cult. If the original cargo is still buried in the desert, whoever finds it controls the narrative of the return. The Gilgamesh tomb rumour is another thread. In 2003, just before the invasion, a team of German archaeologists claimed to have found the tomb of Gilgamesh under the old course of the Euphrates River. They described a complex structure, unlike anything seen before. Then the war started. The discovery vanished from the news. Gilgamesh was 2/3 god, 1/3 man. He was a hybrid. His DNA would be the holy grail of genetics. Proof of the intervention. If we are on the verge of the return, the physical evidence becomes the most valuable currency on Earth. It proves the claim. It validates the lease. And what about Antarctica? We mentioned it earlier as a listening post. But is it also a vault? The Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513, shows the coast of Antarctica without ice. It shows rivers. It shows mountains. Skeptics say it's just a bad drawing of South America, but the coastline matches the subglacial topography of Queen Maud Land, something we only discovered with ground-penetrating radar in the 20th century. How did a Turkish admiral have a map of ice-free Antarctica? He claimed he copied it from older source maps, dating back to the time of Alexander and before. If Antarctica was ice-free 12,000 years ago, a controversial but persistent theory, and if it was the site of a civilization, then the ice is a vault. It preserves everything perfectly, and now the ice is melting. We are seeing pyramidal structures in satellite images. We are hearing reports of massive heat anomalies under the glaciers. Is the base waking up? The flash frozen theory suggests that the shift was sudden. Mammoths in Siberia were found with buttercups still in their mouths. They froze instantly. If the crust of the Earth shifted, a crustal displacement, Antarctica could have moved from a temperate zone to the polar zone in a matter of days or weeks. The civilization there would have been frozen in mid-step. The return of Nibiru is the mechanism for that displacement, the gravitational tug. So we have the sky, Planet 9 Atlas, the ground, Baalbek, Iraq, and the ice, Antarctica. 3 theatres of operation, 3 places where the veil is thinning. The Anunnaki didn't just leave a note, they left the house keys, and now humanity is rummaging through the drawers, trying to find them before the owner pulls into the driveway. The anxiety we feel, the global tension, is the panic of the trespasser. We know deep in our collective unconscious that we don't own this place. We are squatters. We have painted the walls, changed the locks, and convinced ourselves that the deed is in our name. But the real deed is written on a clay tablet, sealed in a jar, buried under the sands of Iraq, or frozen under the ice of Antarctica. And the court date is coming up. The Great Reset that everyone talks about in economics. Maybe it's just a shadow of the real reset, the one that happens when the management changes. As 3I-ATLAS fades into the distance, it leaves us with a choice. We can keep playing make-believe. We can keep pretending that history started 5,000 years ago and that we are the accidental kings of the universe, or we can face the terrifying, humbling possibility that we are a junior species in a very old, very crowded galaxy, and that we have a lot of explaining to do. The final segments will turn inward, because the ultimate evidence isn't in the ground or the sky, it's in the mirror, the double helix of the Anunnaki, the coding error that became the human soul. The most disturbing artifact in the world is not a stone or a tablet. It is chromosome 2 in every great ape, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans. There are 24 pairs of chromosomes. In humans, there are 23. This is a fundamental biological disconnect. We are 98% chimp, yet we are missing a pair. Where did it go? It didn't disappear, it fused. Human chromosome 2 is a Frankenstein chromosome. It clearly shows the telomeres, end caps, of two ancestral ape chromosomes pasted together in the middle. And it shows two centromeres, centers, one of which has been deactivated. Nature can do this. Robertsonian translocations happen, but they are rare, and they are usually deleterious. To have such a fusion become fixed in a population, to become the defining feature of a new species that suddenly leaps forward in intelligence, tool use, and language. That is a lottery win of cosmic proportions, or it is a splice. The Sumerian texts are explicit. They don't say we evolved. They say we were fashioned. Enki and Ninhursag stepped into the house of fashioning. They took the blood of a god, Te-Ima, and mixed it with the clay of the earth. They struggled. They made mistakes. They produced beings that couldn't reproduce, beings with defects. It reads like a lab notebook. It reads like a series of CRISPR trials. If chromosome 2 is the smoking gun of genetic engineering, then we are not just waiting for the Anunnaki. We are the Anunnaki, or at least we are their carriers. This changes the psychological landscape of the return completely. If you are a parent and you return to check on your children, you aren't looking for obedience, you are looking for resemblance. You are looking to see if the traits bred true. What are the Anunnaki traits? Intelligence, ambition, creativity, but also aggression, dominance, a lust for gold, a tendency toward hierarchy and empire. Look at human history. It is a mirror of the Anunnaki wars. We build ziggurats, skyscrapers. We mine the earth. We divide into factions and threaten to destroy the planet. We are acting exactly like our fathers. But there is something else, something the Anunnaki didn't expect, the ghost in the machine. In the texts, Enlil is terrified of humanity, not because we are strong, but because we are knowing. In the Garden of Eden story, which is a retelling of the Sumerian Eden, the concern is that Adam has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. And if he eats from the tree of life, he will live forever, so he is evicted. Why is knowing dangerous? Maybe the splice worked too well. Maybe by mixing their divine DNA with the raw resilient vitality of Earth primates, they created a hybrid that has the potential to surpass the Creator. Hybrid vigour. The Anunnaki are old. Their civilization is static. They have been playing the same power games for millions of years. But we are new. We are messy. We are evolving at a breakneck speed. Maybe that's why they are watching. Not to judge us, but to fear us. Or to harvest us. Not for meat, for novelty, for the unique. Genetic solutions we have developed in our isolation. If 3I-ATLAS was a probe, maybe it wasn't checking our weapons. Maybe it was sequencing our microbiome. Maybe it was checking the updates in the software. The soul might not be a mystical vapour. It might be a data packet, a complexity of consciousness that only arises from struggle, from mortality, from the short burning fuse of a human life. The Anunnaki live too long to learn quickly. We die fast, so we learn fast. We are the processing power of the solar system. This leads to the harvest of souls concept found in Gnosticism and esoteric traditions. The idea that Earth is a farm for consciousness, that we are here to ripen. And when the cycle ends, the crop is collected. This is a dark thought for a quiet night, but it is also empowering. It means we have value. We are not accidental dust. We are the prize. The wars in heaven are not over territory. They are over us. The Enki faction, the geneticists, wants to protect the experiment, to let it run, to see what the hybrid can become. The Enlil faction, the administrators, wants to shut it down, to wipe the drive, to start over with a simpler, quieter batch of workers, and we are caught in the middle, looking up at the sky, wondering which ship is coming. The return is not a single event. It is a process of filtering. Those who remember, who resonate with the signal, who feel the connection to the larger cosmos, are activating the Enki coding. They are waking up to their heritage. Those who cling to the noise, to the fear, the division, the material grind, are remaining in the Enlil frequency. They are the loud ones. The separation of the wheat from the chaff. It's not a moral judgment. It's a frequency sorting. As the magnetic field of the Earth weakens, which it is doing, the veil between these frequencies thins. We are starting to see things. Shadow people, UAPs, glitches. The matrix is destabilizing. And in that instability, we have a choice. To be afraid of the ghosts, or to recognize them as family. The Anunnaki are not monsters. They are our estranged ancestors. They are the reason we look at the stars and feel a pang of homesickness. We are homesick for a place we have never been, because half of our blood was born there. The final segments will bring us back to the present moment, to the silence of your room, to the feeling of being watched, and to the possibility that the watcher isn't in the sky. It's inside you, waking up. The room you are in right now is quiet. You can hear the hum of the refrigerator, or the wind outside, or the breathing of a partner. It feels solid. It feels real. But physics tells us that matter is mostly empty space. It is energy held together by fields. The Sumerians didn't have quantum physics, but they had the concept of the me. The me, pronounced may, were the fundamental decrees of the universe. They were physical objects, sometimes described as tablets, sometimes as jewels, sometimes as garments, that carried the code of civilization, kingship, truth, descent into the netherworld, the art of the scribe, the art of the blacksmith. When a god possessed the me, they possessed the function. If you stole the me for kingship, you became the king. It wasn't symbolic, it was operational. It sounds like software. It sounds like a USB drive that loads a skill set into the user. If the Anunnaki left the me behind, buried in the ziggurats, hidden in the Abzu, then the history of human secret societies, from the Templars to the Freemasons, might be the history of the search for these drives, the lost word of the Masons, the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Grail. Different names for the same thing, the interface, the device that allows a human to access the Anunnaki network. And maybe, just maybe, the network is coming back online. We talk about the Internet of Things, but the ancients lived in the Internet of Beings. Everything was connected. The stones spoke. The rivers had wills. The stars sent messages. We severed that connection. We chose the silence that Enlil wanted. We built walls of logic and materialism to shut out the noise of the gods. But the walls are cracking. The high strangeness of our time, the synchronicities, the Mandela effects, the feeling that time is speeding up, is the result of the reconnection. The bandwidth is increasing. The return of Nibiru isn't just a planet entering the solar system. It is a massive server coming into range of the local Wi-Fi, and our brains are the devices trying to sync. This explains the fatigue, the headaches, the sudden waves of emotion, the vivid dreams of tidal waves and wars. We are downloading, and the file size is too big for our current operating system. We need an upgrade. The transhumanists think the upgrade is silicon, Neuralink, AI, merging with the machine. But the Anunnaki upgrade is biological. It is the activation of the junk DNA, the unlocking of the dormant codons that allow for telepathy, for healing, for extended life. The golden age promised in the text isn't a political utopia. It is a biological restoration. It is the return to the Adam Kadmon, the original uncorrupted template of humanity. But before the restoration, there is the fever, the detox. That is where we are now, the fever stage. The world is sweating out its toxins. The lies are surfacing. The corruption is becoming visible. It is ugly. It is painful. But it is necessary. You cannot install the new software until you uninstall the malware. And the malware is fear. The Anunnaki system was built on hierarchy, on fear of the gods, on the need for intermediaries, priests, kings, to interpret the will of the sky. But the new cycle, the age of Aquarius, is about direct connection. No middlemen, no priests, just you and the cosmos. This is why the institutions are failing. Religions, governments, banks, they are the middlemen, and they are becoming obsolete. The gods are returning, but they are finding that the Lulus have grown up. We don't need the shift boss anymore. We know how to run the mine. In fact, we are thinking about buying the company. This is the ultimate twist in the Anunnaki saga. The child supersedes the parent. If 3I-ATLAS was a test, maybe we passed it. Not by shooting it down, but by seeing it, by naming it, by recognizing it as a messenger. We are awake. An awaking planet is a sovereign planet. The dark forest is only dangerous if you are prey. If you are a predator, or if you are an equal, the forest is just a home. We are stepping out of the cradle. We are wiping the sleep from our eyes. We are looking at the horizon where the planet of the crossing is rising, and we are not cowering. We are waiting, because this time we have something to say. The final segment is the close, the return to the pillow, the integration of the mystery into the safety of sleep, because the most important work happens when you are not awake. The strangest part of an old warning is how ordinary it can look while it waits. A line scratched into clay does not glow in the dark. A story told beside a hearth does not announce itself as data. Even the word crossing can sound like nothing more than poetry, the kind of word that belongs to rivers, or thresholds, or the moment a traveller steps from one road into another. And yet, in the reference you shared, that is the shape of the tension. Small visitors arriving out of sequence, nudging modern attention back toward an ancient idea that something returns on a long rhythm. Not everyone hears a warning in that rhythm. Some people only hear coincidence, and it is true that coincidence can be persuasive when the mind is tired. At night, a pattern can feel like a presence. A cluster of facts can feel like intention. That is not a flaw in the mind. It is one of its oldest skills, to connect scattered points and build a map quickly enough to survive. The karma question is not whether the map is perfect. It is whether the mind is mapping something real. Because the first interstellar object, the second and the third, however each is explained in mainstream terms, do have one undeniable effect. They remind us that the solar system is open, not sealed, and that outside can pass through inside without asking permission. When that realization settles in, it changes the emotional meaning of the night sky. The sky stops being a ceiling. It becomes a shoreline. And once the sky feels like a shoreline, the oldest human instinct returns, to look for lights on the water. That is where ancient texts become dangerous in a gentle way. They offer language for feelings that modern life rarely names. They suggest that the sky has episodes, not just weather. They imply that certain kinds of arrivals belong to certain kinds of times. They teach the listener, quietly, to hold two ideas at once, that a story can be symbolic, and that a symbol can still be pointing towards something physical. But a trustworthy story has to breathe. It has to admit uncertainty without dissolving into emptiness. It has to let the listener feel the pull of an idea, while also feeling the boundaries of what can honestly be said. So here is a boundary that matters. There is no academic consensus that an ancient world called Nibiru is returning, or that interstellar objects are markers placed on a schedule. That belongs to interpretation, not proof. And yet, the same reference you shared also makes room for a different, more careful tension. There is debate in modern astronomy about whether an unseen, distant planet might exist beyond Neptune, sometimes framed as Planet 9. And that debate itself is real. That is enough for the mind to keep walking. Because if the outer solar system can hide something large for a long time, then the sky becomes, once again, a place with rooms we have not entered. And when there are unopened rooms, people begin to tell stories about what might be inside them. In ancient Mesopotamia, the message was rarely delivered in a single straightforward announcement. It was distributed. It lived in the way the year was divided. It lived in the way the sky was described as pathways. It lived in the way a king's legitimacy could be spoken of as something that came down, rather than something negotiated between human beings. Sometimes the genius of an old system is not that it predicts the future. It is that it trains attention. If you want a society to keep watching the sky, you don't need to give them a telescope. You need to give them a reason to care. You need to make the sky feel relevant to harvests, to authority, to the safety of the home. Once that relevance is established, the watching continues on its own. So when a modern person feels unsettled by an object from outside the solar system, it may not be because the object is extraordinary in itself. It may be because something old inside the human mind has been touched, like a bell that still rings even after the hand that cast it is long gone. That inner bell is the real return, and it is not always comfortable, because a returning attention has consequences. It asks for time. It asks for humility. It asks for the admission that modern certainty has limits, that there are still things we cannot locate, name, or fully explain. Most people can live with mystery when it is abstract. It becomes harder when mystery begins to feel nearby. The reference script lingers on that feeling, the sense that once visitation becomes conceivable, it also becomes psychologically contagious. Once the mind accepts that the solar system can be entered by outsiders, the mind begins to wonder what else might enter. Ideas, shifts in history, sudden turns in collective mood. And then, quietly, the mystery tightens. Because the oldest warnings are rarely about the sky alone. They are about what happens to human beings when the sky changes. In flood stories, the central terror is not water, it is reset. A reset means that whatever was built can be undone. It means that progress can be reversed. It means that the world you thought was stable may only be stable inside a window of time. This is one reason such stories endure. They don't merely frighten, they prepare. They teach a civilization to store meaning in portable forms. Songs, rituals, repeated numbers, repeated phrases. They teach the listener how to carry a warning through a collapse. And at night, when modern life finally softens, when the email stops, when the streets quiet down, those portable forms can become audible again. A person begins to notice the oddity of living by inherited measurements, minutes, hours, degrees, the invisible grid laid over space and time, as if someone long ago insisted that the world should be countable, divisible, trackable. And once you notice that grid, you begin to suspect that it was not created only for convenience. It might have been created for monitoring. Monitoring does not need a villain. A sailor monitors the wind. A farmer monitors the soil. Monitoring is simply what people do when the environment can surprise them. The question is what the ancient environment felt like. Did it feel like a sky that could change abruptly? Did it feel like a world where normal was not guaranteed? Or did it simply feel like power, human power, was always fragile, And so every generation needed stories that reminded them to stay modest. Those are different interpretations, and they lead to different kinds of fear. If the warning is cosmic, then the fear is about impact, gravity, the unseen hand of the outer system. If the warning is social, then the fear is about empires, about arrogance, about the way civilizations collapse when they forget the conditions that made them possible. The unsettling part is that both interpretations can be true at the same time. A cosmic disturbance can trigger social collapse. A social collapse can be remembered as a cosmic judgment, and memory does not preserve the difference with perfect accuracy. It preserves the emotional truth. Something happened, and it changed everything. This is why a calm documentary can remain mentally active without becoming sensational. The aim is not to force the listener into belief. The aim is to keep the mind gently engaged with a possibility that some human stories are not only entertainment, but long-term storage devices. If that is true, then even a speculative story about Nibiru has a practical purpose. It keeps the listener asking the right kind of question, not, is it arriving tomorrow? But, what would the first sign feel like if it were real? The first sign would not be a billboard in the sky. It would be a shift in interpretation. It would be the moment people begin to look at ordinary data and feel uncomfortably that it belongs to a larger pattern. It would be the moment when the night sky stops being decorative and becomes procedural again, something you check, like a horizon for weather. And that is already happening in the simple fact that interstellar visitors have entered the public imagination and stayed there. There is a quiet discipline required here, to hold the possibility without turning it into certainty, to allow the mind to wander without letting it sprint, to treat the ancient texts as texts, human artifacts shaped by politics, religion and poetic exaggeration, while still admitting that humans sometimes preserve real events in distorted forms. That balance is the difference between mystery and misinformation. It is also, not coincidentally, the difference between a story that keeps trust and a story that burns trust. Trust is not built by certainty, it is built by careful tone. So imagine the scene that matters most, not in the sky, but in the hands of a scribe. A person sits in lamplight, pressing a reed into clay, repeating a story they inherited. They do not know whether the story is literal. They only know it is important enough to copy. They know that some details are repeated with unusual care. A number, a name, a direction, a word like crossing. Those repeated details are where the code lives, if any code exists at all. Not a spy code, a survival code. A way of telling the future, keep watching. And if the future is listening tonight, in a quiet room, then the code has worked. Because attention is the beginning of every discovery. Not discovery in the triumphant sense, discovery in the humble sense, noticing that the universe is larger than the story currently being told about it. The reference script ends its opening movement by inviting the listener to descend into older origins, where astronomy, memory and myth begin to blend. It is a good invitation because blending is what the mind naturally does when it tries to make meaning of deep time. Deep time is too big to hold in a single clean explanation. So the mind holds it in layers, a scientific layer, a symbolic layer, a historical layer, and beneath those a more private layer, the feeling that something is approaching, not necessarily in space, but in understanding. That private feeling is not evidence, but it is data of a different kind. It is the kind of data that tells you what the story is truly about. This story is not ultimately about an object called 3I-ATLAS, or a debated planet beyond Neptune, or a name like Nibiru. It is about the returning awareness that human beings live inside a system that can surprise them. And if that awareness keeps returning, generation after generation, then perhaps the oldest warning was never meant to be fully solved. Perhaps it was meant to be kept alive, not as panic, as posture, a way of standing beneath the night sky with just enough humility to notice when something changes. So as the hour grows quieter, let the mystery remain. Where it belongs, slightly out of reach, let it be unresolved but not empty, because even if every extraordinary interpretation turns out to be wrong, one thing will remain true. The solar system is not a locked room, and somewhere beyond the familiar orbits, in the part of the map that still resists naming, there is still space for an arrival that cannot yet be described, only anticipated. When a system changes, the last thing to shift is not the hardware, but the assumption that the system is permanent. The Romans assumed Rome was eternal. The Maya assumed the long count would restart. We assume that electricity, the internet, and the global supply chain are the floorboards of reality, rather than a rug thrown over the dirt. The Anunnaki warning is, at its core, a challenge to that assumption. It suggests that civilization is not a linear climb from caves to starships. It is a cycle, a sine wave. We go up, we reach a peak of high technology and hubris, and then the sine wave goes down. The return is the inflection point. If the texts are right, this has happened before, perhaps many times. The golden ages of the past, Atlantis, Lemuria, the first time of Egypt, were not myths. They were previous peaks, and they all ended. Why? Maybe because the landlord came back and decided the tenants had breached the contract, or maybe simply because the cosmic environment shifted. A solar flare, a pole shift, a passing body that reset the gravitational board. The terror of the Anunnaki narrative isn't that they are aliens, it's that they represent a force we cannot negotiate with. You cannot sue a planet. You cannot sanction an orbit. This realization strips us of our modern armor. It leaves us naked. And in that nakedness, we find something surprising. We find that we are still here, despite the floods, despite the fires, despite the silence of the gods. Humanity has survived every reset. We are the cockroaches of the galaxy, in the best possible sense. We are resilient. We are adaptable. We are stubborn. Enlil wanted to wipe us out because we were noisy, but Enki saved us because we were clever. That cleverness, that spark of the divine rebel, is our inheritance. If the Watchers are returning, they aren't coming back to a planet of helpless apes. They are coming back to a planet of survivors. We have cracked the atom. We have mapped the genome. We have touched the edge of the solar system. We are not the same Lulus who cowered in the mud 200,000 years ago. This changes the dynamic of the meeting. It's no longer a master and a slave. It's a creator, and a creation that has outgrown the lab. The silence of the universe might be a quarantine, a protection, keeping us isolated until we were ready, until we stopped throwing rocks and started building rockets. Are we ready now? Probably not. We still throw rocks, we just call them missiles, but we are close. The quickening of time, the intensity of information, the breakdown of old narratives, it all points to a graduation event. Whether that graduation is a handshake or a spanking remains to be seen, but the exam has started. As you lie there in the safety of the dark, think about the double helix, the two serpents entwined on the staff of Hermes, the caduceus, the symbol of DNA, the symbol of Enki. It represents the balance of opposites, earth and sky, human and divine, mortality and eternity. We are the bridge between those two worlds. We are the mud that learned to dream. The Anunnaki may have given us the hardware, but we wrote the poetry. We wrote the music. We created the love and the compassion that they seem to lack. Maybe that was the point of the experiment all along, to see if a biological machine could develop a soul. If so, the experiment is a success. The return of Nibiru, or Planet 9, or the blue star, is just a clock striking 12. It marks the end of the lesson. The teacher is coming back into the room. Put down your pencils. The test is over. And whatever happens next, whatever new heaven and new earth awaits, remember one thing. You are not an accident. You are a design. And designs have a purpose. Sleep well. The stars are watching, but so are you.